Welcome. Hello, I'm Star Parker. And when the COVID-19 crisis first began to grip our nation last March, parents immediately got nervous about the impact shutting down schools would have on their children's education. A Gallup poll showed that 42% of parents expressed concern that the crisis would have a negative effect on their child's learning. Of these parents, the most concern was among non-white parents, 52% concerned compared to white parents at 36% concerned. Nearly twice as many non-white parents, 39%, compared to 21% of white parents, said the school year should be extended into the summer months if they remain closed for the remainder of the regular school year. Well, the schools did remain closed the first half of 2020, and more than halfway into the summer, they are not only still closed, there is now political debate regarding if we should reopen our schools. A new report out of Los Angeles from the Los Angeles Unified School District, the nation's second largest school district, sharpens the picture regarding why parents, particularly Black and Latino parents, should be even more concerned, especially now that politics has kids in the middle of a tug of war. According to the report, 67% of Latino students and 67% of Black students, these are the middle school students, they have been active. They've been participating online in classes. Among high schoolers, 73% of Latino and 71% of Black students have been actively participating online. But this means that some 33% of Black and Latino middle school students and between 27 and 29% of Latino and Black high schoolers are falling behind. And unfortunately, these are generally the same students that are disproportionately in broken homes, in at-risk communities, and in failing public school districts. So as a result of this news and a response to the parents' concern, Black and white parents' concern, President Trump has set the reopening of America's schools as a major priority. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos is urging all the school districts around the country to look at any and every option available to keep our children safe amidst this international crisis brought on by COVID-19, with a goal to reopen our schools in the fall. But our nation's largest education teachers unions, the National Education Association and the American Federation of Teachers, they're fighting against reopening the schools. They have declared this as a non-starter. In fact, their list is long for what they want if they were going to open the schools. It just doesn't seem to matter to them what parents are saying, nor what is happening to our nation's children, especially our nation's Black and Latino children. They don't seem to even care that two prestigious organizations have joined the debate that schools need to reopen and are emphasizing how critically important physical presence is in education. The American Academy of Pediatrics has issued a report as its guidance for school reentry. The report provides extensive guidelines for how to open schools safely and how to operate those schools during these trying times. It clearly says the importance of in-person learning is well documented, and there is already evidence of the negative impact on children because schools closing in the middle of the spring of 2020. We all know it. The kids are falling behind. But another study, the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, has published a report under the headline, "Schools should prioritize reopening in the fall of 2020, especially for grades K through 5. While weighing the risks and benefits." Yet, in light of these two studies and record numbers of parents pleading that schools should reopen, the steadfast response of our nation's largest teachers' unions is to fight to keep our schools closed, period. So you got to ask yourself, why are these teachers' unions playing politics with children, especially our nation's most vulnerable children, and fighting to keep schools closed from in-class learning? It's not that the teachers aren't being paid, they are. It's not that classrooms and cafeterias cannot be COVID compliant, they can. So let's talk about this. It's a very hot headline, schools reopening. We're going to talk about it right now on Cure America after this important message.
I'm Franklin Graham. Do Black Lives Matter? Absolutely, you bet they do. God made and created each and every one of us, and Your life matters because, you see, all of us are precious to God. But we have a problem, and that problem is called sin. And sin separates us from God. But the Bible tells us that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but should have everlasting life. If you would like to invite Jesus Christ to come into your heart, he will come in and change your life, change the direction of your life for eternity. Just pray this prayer with me. Just say, God, I'm a sinner. I'm sorry. Forgive me. I believe that Jesus is your Son, that he died for my sins, that you raised him to life, and I'd like to invite him to come into my heart right now. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. If you prayed that prayer, we've got someone who would like to speak with you and pray with you right now. Just call that number. God bless.
Welcome back. I have a really special guest. We're talking about reopening schools, and so I thought you might want to meet Nicole to put a real face to the challenges that have now become political, whether we're going to open schools and allow for our children to learn in an environment with other peers, with other students. So Nicole, thank you for joining me.
You're welcome.
You've become a good friend. You're welcome. I'm so happy that you were able to do this with me because your story is real.
Yeah.
Your story is what we here in Washington are just talking about, as if there's not a real person behind some of the dilemma that we're causing by keeping these schools closed. Especially now, you have the teachers' unions that want them closed. Tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you have 3 children. Tell us about who they are.
I have 3 children, 2 girls and 1 boy. My oldest is 10.
There's a boy?
It's a girl.
The girl's 10.
10. I have an 8-year-old daughter, and my son is 6.
Okay, and so the 10 is what grade?
She's going to the 5th.
She's going to 5th now. So she came out of the 4th grade being at home for half of the year.
Yeah.
Did it work out for her?
Not too much in the beginning.
Okay.
Yeah. My youngest, which is 6, he had a hard time with it.
Okay, so now the youngest is 6 in what grade?
Kindergarten.
In the kindergarten, and then your middle child, 8.
Yeah, she's going to the 3rd.
She's going to the 3rd, which is when statistics tell us that you can lose them in 3rd grade. If they can't do 3rd grade, they're going to have trouble the rest of their time.
Yeah, it was hard for her to focus also.
It was. Okay, so let's go one by one, because now you get a notice, all of a sudden, we're closing schools. You are a single mom.
Yeah.
You get up and go to work every day. In fact, I knew you kind of travel 2 hours to get to work every day on the metro. So what was that first day like?
They sent out schedules the first day.
Okay.
And like a weekly schedule they sent out for the children, and they had to log on into their computers. Some of the passwords were wrong.
Oh dear.
Yeah, it was just a mess for I'm gonna say the first 3 weeks.
So the school district provided you with 3 computers, one for each of the children.
Yeah.
You had the computer. You're like, okay, I got to get to work, but let me first kind of sit them down and figure out each of their schedule.
Because they couldn't remember their passwords. Then the teachers would send the passwords. They didn't work.
Okay.
So it was like they would miss lessons. It was just a mess.
Now, was this on a Zoom? So they
Most
could
of
see
them,
their
like
other
it was like
classmates?
certain days they would have Zoom, but for the most part they were just doing the work by themselves. Like they'll send out a lesson and it had a deadline by the time the children had to complete the work.
Okay, now, did they have interaction with their teacher? Or what happened? Like, if they needed your help, well, you weren't there either. They were just home trying to figure it out?
If it was a day that they just had a full schedule, they do the work by themselves.
Okay.
If the children didn't understand, the teachers asked the parents to reach out to them, like, separately and explain what was going on if the child didn't understand the lesson. And they'll get back with you, but
you were at work.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me about your little boy then, because he's 6, and so he was just like, Mommy, because your girls are going to make, because they were already doing very well in school when this happened.
They've been there for a while.
Yeah, and so they'll be able to readjust, hopefully, and we'll get to the hopefully in a moment. Tell me about your little son, the little cutie that is 6 years old.
He didn't want to sit in front of that computer.
Not doing lessons. He might want to sit in there and watch some cartoons.
But it was hard.
Was it?
For him, yeah.
Okay, so what's going to happen? Is he going to be able to go to the next grade level?
Yeah, they all passed.
They all passed. but we don't know where they are in that.
Yeah.
Now we're looking at a new dilemma. They're not reopening the schools. In fact, you tell us about, you just got your notice that they're going to do what?
Virtual learning again until the end of January.
Till the end of January. Because
School
at first you
starts-
thought that they were going to start in August. And now
Yeah, it's from August the 31st until January the 29th.
they're saying that they have to stay at home. Are there parents like you that are saying maybe we ought to go down to the school board and talk
Yeah, a
to
lot
them?
of parents in my neighborhood
Or saying
because
what?
a lot of them work,
Right.
so it's going to be hard trying to. And they have small kids like myself.
Right.
They're not responsible to stay home by themselves and
Right.
log onto a computer every morning.
Right. Well, this is the reality now. So we're trying to sort through this debate because when you think about people that have students, especially your students, and that live in communities that are already a little at risk, and so we need to get a better understanding of how do we expect them to keep up with their studies? Have these questions been asked of anyone outside of your immediate circles, like you and your friends? Have you gone to anyone to talk to
They
them?
haven't had any meetings.
You haven't had any meetings?
No.
So you're just on your own with a computer that if you don't reach someone, then it's just too bad.
Yeah.
So you're not seeing any opportunities for school board meeting, no opportunity to say,
Nothing.
do we have any options here?
Nothing.
But you've made it. You're getting to work every day.
Yeah.
Must be kind of difficult to get home then. What do you have to do? You got to go through and see did they
Make
really
sure
do
they
their...
completed everything.
Did they?
Yeah, they did.
Not the 6-year-old. He said he watched a little bit more cartoons than maybe he should have because I bet the girls are kind of helping there too.
Yeah, they help
to make
him
sure
out a
that
lot.
he's getting his little studies done. Your little puppy can't help, but
No.
that puppy needs to go out for a walk himself. Well, I'm really glad that you give me the opportunity to talk to you because we are very concerned about you, about Nicole, and about all of the Nicoles that are having real trouble if somebody else is trying to determine that they don't want to figure out how to get your kids back to class.
Yeah.
We got to figure it out. And so I just really appreciate you spending this time with me.
You're welcome.
Well, we're going to talk about education. We have to. We're going to have to talk about how do we reopen the schools. We're going to have to talk about how does someone like Nicole recover from her children being out of school for about 6 months now, another 6 months maybe. And we're going to have to talk about what we as society can be thinking about and doing in public policy. I'll be right back.
If the Act passes in its current form as H.R. 5, then every right that women have fought for will cease to exist. H.R. 5 is a human rights violation. Every person in this country will lose their right to single-sex sports, shelters, grants, and loans. The law will forbid ever distinguishing between women and men. Male rapists will go to women's prisons and will likely assault female inmates. Female survivors of rape will be unable to contest male presence in women's shelters. Men will dominate women's sports. Girls who would have taken first place will be denied scholastic opportunity. Women who use male pronouns to talk about men may be arrested, fined, and banned from social media platforms. Girls will stay home from school when they have their periods to avoid harassment by boys in mixed-sex toilets. Girls and women will no longer have a right to ask for female medical staff or intimate care providers. Everything I just listed is already happening. And it's only going to get worse if gender identity is recognized in federal law.
Why are conservatives standing with liberals to strip women of their rights? America's women deserve better.
Well, Nicole's story is very compelling. The challenge is that Nicole's story is the reality for parents all across the country right now. Here she is, a single mom with 3 children, full-time job, trying to figure out how to do this with a assigned laptop and instructors that don't even know how to work the laptop themselves, wrong passwords. This is a mess. So I want to talk about it. We're going to talk about it, and I have an exciting guest panelist. You know my regular rebels. I mean, of course, I have Dr. Bill Allen, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Urban Cure. Thank you for always being with us, and he is a rebel. In fact, some of you are saying, I have to listen to him 20 times before I understand exactly what did he just say. I just knew it was profound. We also have Henry Olsen. We thank you again for being here, Washington Post columnist, but also of the Ethics and Public Policy Center here in Washington, D.C., where you already know they look at all public policy that deals with culture and issues like what we're talking about today on reopening schools. But I have an amazing guest. Lindsey, I've known her for quite some time, and I have to tell you, Lindsey Burke, I'm going to let you know what her title is, because then you can see just why I'm so excited about her being here. She is the director for the Center for Education Policy and Will Skillman Fellow in Education Policy at the Heritage Foundation. She researches and writes on federal and state education issues, a long record. Right here in Washington, D.C. Everyone knows her that works anywhere near education policy, and she's always been such an advocate for parents and teachers. And I'm very excited for you to join me today. And you might even make it to our Rebel panel. Some of your colleagues at Heritage try, but we will see how that works out. But I'm going to start with you, because I know the gentlemen have a lot to say on this issue too, because both are so amazingly thoughtful in areas of education. In fact, some don't know that Dr. Allen is a professor. He's been a professor, learned and doctorate for quite some time. But you did this column on the pandemic pods. The pandemic pods. What is happening is all of K through 12 education is reshaping. And I want you to talk a little bit about that, because we have a big concern right now. Politics is getting in the way of reopening schools, and then we have situations where millions of parents are extremely concerned. Tell us a little bit about what you're finding, why you're so excited.
I'm so excited.
I know. It is a good idea.
Well, you know, and this is, what is a pandemic pod, right?
Yeah.
What a crazy idea. And this is something that has all of a sudden popped up over the past week. We have really seen it start to proliferate. And these are families that, you're right, it's dire circumstances, right? Schools aren't reopening across the country. They're trying to figure out what they're going to do in the next few weeks. School starts in a matter of weeks, hypothetically. And so families are getting together, they're banding together within their neighborhoods. They're basically co-quarantining groups of kids in their neighborhoods, and then hiring a teacher and bringing that teacher in to basically co-quarantine with their co-quarantine children. And provide instruction that way. They're paying out of pocket directly to that teacher.
$500, I think.
Exactly, it ranges, but $500 is what we've seen in the area at least, and that's per month, per kid that they're paying. So certainly, you know, policy is going to catch up eventually, I think, with this. We need to make sure that low-income families in particular can participate in this pandemic pod proliferation that we're seeing.
But, you know, it's interesting because your column that's up on the Daily Signal talks about how, while it's costing the parent $500 per student, the teacher says, yeah, I'm making more money than I make as a teacher. And then yet we're looking at the kind of investments that we make per student in the classrooms of the public schools. Dr. Allen, sometimes I've seen numbers that are up to $30,000 a student to get them educated. Most states, I suppose, it runs about $8,000 per child per year to get them educated. But what about this pandemic pod? Is this something that we might see grow out of that entrepreneurial and or just desperate parent saying, I can do something other than wait for the government to reopen my school?
Well, parents are desperate, but I would call them capable.
Yes.
And I think the really exciting thing about this is it represents citizens who aren't waiting for someone to say go. Which is really the strength of this society.
Right.
It's a strength that has been worn down over years of welfare dependency and governmental intrusion and bureaucracy, but the core is still there, and it's inspiring to think that people are not going to sit there and wait for somebody to tell them what to do. They're going to figure it out and get it done themselves. So this is critical. Think about it. You're bypassing enormous expenditures.
Right.
So near $15,000 really across the country for school districts, what they spend. All that money is still there, still being paid to people. And in spite of it, parents have the resources to educate their children and ignore it.
Right.
Now that tells us we've got a lot of resources here to call upon.
I think it does, and I think that when we have stories of parents that are saying, I'm going to figure this out, even like our Nicole, who has 3 children, she's trying to figure that out and use any resources that they have. Henry, it sounds almost like the model of the old schoolhouse. We actually used to do education like this. Is there a possibility that we could return to some of the just core principles that built this country?
Well, I think it would have to be something, if this lasts for a while and it works, then I can imagine people, just like the charter school movement started small and now educates millions of kids, the homeschool movement started small and now educates millions of kids. If people do this for a whole school year and say, hey, this works, you'll start to see political pressure to legalize the pot and make that part of the education system. I mean, there's certainly going to be a lot of people that, absent government financial help, can't afford to pay, $500 a month per child per month. That pretty much gets out of the household budget for most American families.
That's right.
But that's another thing that would be addressed as a political movement started to rise.
Well, it's interesting because, first of all, you said that make it legal, so I'm wondering if it's illegal, and if someone's probably going to try to do that. But, Lindsey, Secretary DeVos actually put the idea out there that if you are a parent and your school district can't figure out how to open your schools, maybe we should give the money to families. So perhaps this is that opportunity. And in fact, I was looking at some of the money we spend. Oh my goodness, it's just amazing. We have 72 million of our children total. We have 14 million poor students. Most of them are in the Title I. We have $16.3 billion that we're spending in Title I. $72.7 billion we're spending in the Department of Education. Is there a political battle coming to where parents are going to say, hey, why am I digging in my pocket twice?
Yeah, I think it's here. I hope it's here because policy has always needed this shift where we say, look, if we're spending this money, it needs to be student-centered and portable. We should be funding children and not institutions and allowing those dollars to follow them to whatever, not only school, but learning option, right? We're in this new world of pandemic pods. It's learning options now. And so those dollars desperately need to follow. And look, we're at the point now we saw $13 billion in new money spent in the CARES Act a few months ago. Right. We're hearing now about another $105 billion just on education, right? Let's hope not. But if that money goes out the door, that money needs to go directly to families. Secretary DeVos is right. We need to be funding the child and allowing those dollars to follow them to whatever education option that works for them. Oh, and by the way, is open. Because right now, so many schools are open. And if you're a parent in a district, look at Los Angeles. Los Angeles has 600,000 children. They've said they're going to close their doors. Parents deserve a refund.
Not only close their doors, that governor in California is saying, well, if we're not going to allow the public schools to open, then you private ones can't stay open either. Which brings me to a question for you, Henry, because it seems you believe so much in the initiative of people that we can actually make a difference here in the different places that you mentioned. The homeschool movement that's now at about 5 million people, the charter school, but they're both under attack. It's constant that they have to keep trying to stay open. Number one, I want to ask you, can this survive? Do you think enough parents will say, I want to do this? But number two, we're looking at now a political battle to then keep them open. What is standing in the way of parents just being able to get the best education that they want for their children in whatever learning environment they want?
I think the biggest thing is that most parents still want to rely on a traditional public school.
Okay.
So they are less favorable towards giving other parents the opportunity to pursue options, particularly since they think that will take tax dollars away from their children. What makes this as a huge opportunity for choice advocates is this will be the first time when the schools that they value and rely on will not be there to service their children. So they will be forced to either oversee in their own homes a lesson plan, which means they'll actually look at the lesson plans.
Yeah, exactly what you were saying.
Or, for the people with means, provide alternatives. Traditionally, it's the high-income, educated parent who is most resistant to allowing choice. They're exactly the ones who are going to be most put upon by these school closures, and that may cause them to change their opinion about public schooling generally.
Well, that would be nice, but I'm wondering how much that the reality is there, because where I've seen the battle being in the school choice movement for over 30 years is not with the high-end parents. They seem to not even care about it because they're buying education for their children. It seems like it's the middle class that has become so addicted to government providing for their children's education. But Dr. Allen, that's a fascinating point Henry brought up, that they're so addicted that they're going to keep other children from having those options that their parents are saying they so desperately need. Is this going to then end up a battle between parent to parent, or is this going to be a new opportunity, especially with the Espinosa Supreme Court decision, for parents to just say, maybe I do better serve my child looking at everything that's available.
Yeah, well, with all due respect, addiction usually results from getting a high. And you've got to admit, when it comes to public education, these parents are not getting any highs. We're talking mainly about systems where schools are failing. Those who compete with charter schools. They're usually in densely populated urban areas, and the schools are failing.
Yes, they are.
The parents are not therefore so much addicted as dependent. They have been under the impression that there is nothing else they can do.
Yeah, but I don't think he's talking about the parents of, when I use the word addicted, I'm talking about that middle-class suburban parent, because the others are wanting to get out, and he's saying that they don't want to get out.
So am I talking about that middle class and even the suburbans?
Okay.
Think of it this way. Ask, why is it that the National PTA is in lockstep with the National Education Association?
I don't know.
And what does that reflect about the local PTAs?
Okay.
Why is it local school boards aren't leading the charge on this? Because a structure has been put in place in which they've been completely subordinated and made dependent. And you don't find independent voices of representation all the way down to the community level. I've served on school boards. I know what they're capable of. They're not performing.
No, they're
Why
not,
are
but
they
I don't know. But
performing?
Henry just said that the parents like it that way. So is it that they just are not addicted and they just kind of say, well, this is our reality, so we just wanted to
That's
keep
my
going?
point.
Is this, well, you've been working in education reform for quite some time. Is this what you're finding, that parents are just saying, I'm stuck, so I'm just going to hope it works out for us? Because, you know, Jason Riley just did an article in Tom Sowell's new book on charter schools. And the information on how successful charters are, you would think that everyone would want them, not there to be such an opposition against them. So what's going on in the parents' mind?
I think a big part of it, if we think about how, as a society, we think about Congress, we all say, oh, Congress, you know, they're doing a terrible job, but my member's doing a pretty good job. We see the same phenomenon with public education. Public education needs to be improved, but I love my local school, I like my teacher, and so I think we get that playing in overall to the...
So this, is this what resonated with you, that what you were saying about
For a
the
lot
parents
of people, they see the public school as working for them. That they see, you know, a lot of places the parents boast about their public schools because their kids are getting into decent colleges. They think their kids are learning. Other places,
So you think their kids are learning?
other places they may not. You know, they value it for different reasons. In some places, it's focal for community pride, and you know that's part of that comes through in Ben Sass's book Them, where he talks about Fremont High School, his high school in Nebraska, as a place of community pride rather than a place of learning. So there's lots of people who find it acceptable to good, and even if they see that the system as a whole is problematic. And that's something that makes it difficult to get them to change. But now we have something where the system won't work for them.
It's not working at all.
It's not working at all.
Yeah. But Dr. Allen, then I'm concerned about this discussion because the most at-risk are trapped in these failing schools. And if this is true, that, well, mine's working, so I just really don't care that those others aren't working, that we're going to continue with the status quo, that we're going to keep this whole PTA with the teachers union party going on. This seems to be breaking down for the most at-risk. Is this a movement for the most at-risk parents to say, I'm going to go to the pod? I want the pod.
It's certainly an opportunity. And if you can find a way to bring any dollars to the support of those at-risk parents, that would give impetus to this, an opportunity to exploit this moment so that we can, in effect, break up what is essentially a feudal structure.
Well, we need to break it up. I want to hear more about how we're going to break it up right after this.
Today, a student in public school will pray or lead a Bible study. Someone will share the gospel with a lost soul. Today, a pastor will preach boldly the truth of the Scriptures without fear of the IRS. The body of Christ will be the salt and light in a darkened world to engage responsible biblical citizens. Today, the life of an innocent child will be saved, and a mother will experience the joy of a newborn baby. A distraught woman will find hope and choose life rather than death. Today, there is a strong voice defending God's created natural order of marriage and family. There is a defender of freedom in the courtroom and in the halls of Congress and in legislative bodies across the land. Today, a young girl by the name of Justina Pelletier will eat dinner with her family and sleep in her own bed. Today, all of this is possible because of the ministry of Liberty Counsel. People from all over America will find help and hope because of Liberty Counsel. The adversity they face will be turned into victory, case by case, law by law, person by person. Liberty Counsel is advancing religious freedom, the sanctity of human life, and the family through litigation, education, and public policy. In the midst of adversity, there is opportunity to glorify God and to restore the culture. And that is the mission of Liberty Counsel, to restore the culture by advancing life, liberty, and family.
I think one of the main reasons that I was so excited about the the pandemic pods, I can almost envision that these are just a bunch of local soccer mom types that are like, we're getting an education for our children. But the reason I was so intrigued by it is because, as I mentioned, we're looking at $72.7 billion in the Department of Education being spent, $16.3 billion for the poor in our society. We have 65.5 million enrolled in public school and 11 million enrolled in private schools, and we have such a dilemma with children not learning in our traditional system, the system that Dr. Allen wants to bust up. I think he said he wants to bust it up, or it might need some help busting up. But those kids are trapped in these systems, and now, as we just heard, they're just being given a computer and go figure it out on your own. So I'm going to come to you first, Dr. Allen, to say, is the system so entrenched that we are not going to be able to get out of what we're seeing today, which is a political fight? These teachers' unions have dug in. We have governors now that are saying, too bad, we're not opening these schools. Where do we go from here? What should be the community response?
Well, I think you've identified correctly. It's a political fight. A quarter century ago, a little more than that, I wrote a plan, a new framework for public education in Michigan, in which I called precisely for breaking it up. And I used a metaphor. I said, look, people need to eat, but that's no reason for the government to start opening grocery stores.
Yeah, they wish.
They need education. The government doesn't have to run the schools. There are more efficient ways to do that.
That's right.
So this is a moment in which we can push that argument. It's not guaranteed to prevail, but it is a prime opportunity to push it. So we should not relent now in demanding that the innovations we see parents practicing through homeschooling, through the pandemic pods, through micro schools, this whole array of possibilities which show what people are capable of, we should insist that this means we don't need the so-called experts who created a feudal barony. We need to get free of them. It's time to talk liberation.
But how do we get to that liberation point? Leslie, you've been involved in the school choice movement forever as well, and we keep finding out that, I mean, we just got the Espinosa decision. Tell folks what that looks like for you. Is it hopeful? And explain a little bit about Espinosa.
It's extremely hopeful. I would say you're exactly right. The problem is we have tied housing to schooling, so that is fundamentally what the issue is. And until we break that housing and schooling connection where we assign kids to a school based on where their parents can afford to live, I don't think we'll ever see long-term improvements. Espinosa plays into that in a really nice way. Espinosa effectively said that if a state has a private school choice program, it has to allow private religious schools to participate. They cannot be excluded from that private school choice program, which is great because it expands the universe of options that are available to kids. Because we know parents look for schools for a variety of reasons. The number one is safety. That's the number one reason they look for. But then close after that, number two is values-based education.
Especially in our urban centers. The poorer the parent, the more they want that private school. They want that church school because they know that they need help.
Just a quick note, a danger. We don't want to facilitate the opt-out opportunity for the well-to-do and neglect those who aren't well-to-do. They must also have an opt-out opportunity. So we have to combine these two things.
Well, then I think that's the challenge right now. And so, Henry, I want to know, how do we combine it? Because right now, the more wealthy you are, you actually have choice in education. You can send your kid to whatever school. You can buy a teacher and have them come teach your children at home. And if you're in the middle class, you can move. As you're saying, housing is attached to what school. So there are people at the schools that you just described that they moved in that district on purpose just to get to that school. That is not working for Nicole. That is not working for others that are like Nicole, that are single parents with children, and now they want better for their child. They want their child to get a quality education. That is a very group that we're discussing here why I'm so intrigued by these pods. Can something like this work, and then how? How do we get something like this through public policy?
Well, ultimately, what Abraham Lincoln said is true, is that public opinion, with it you have everything, and without it you have nothing. And that's what this opportunity is that because for the first time, the public schools that these parents who have not been favorable to arguments of widespread choice either aren't open or are under functioning, and they're going to be dealing with it over the next 6 to 12 months. For the first time, these people can look and say, maybe these school choice advocates had a point. Maybe if I had more choice all along, I wouldn't have been having to deal with this. And that gives a chance to change public opinion. And once we have public opinion on our side, the details kind of fall into themselves because we put together a coalition of people who want change.
Well, I guess I'm a little suspicious because these parents that we're talking about that now we have to convince that school options are a good idea are different parents from the ones that are in our most hard hit and broken schools. These are the parents that we're seeing 85, 90% saying, please help us. And in fact, that's how DeSantis even won in Florida because he said, I'm going to let your children out of these horrible, deplorable, failing schools. So I'm just not sure because also though I see it, those suburban parents are the ones that are supporting this effort not to reopen school. We'll just kind of figure it out because we have a computer. So Dr. Allen, is this movement going to have to happen from those that are in the most critical and dire situation right now?
Well, that's true across the board, given the crises we face today. We've talked about this in previous programs, that at a certain point we have to realize that those who stand in the top shelf positions of this society are not going to produce change. They're going to continue to tyrannize. And unless, therefore, those who are not on the top shelf seize control, they are going to suffer. That's the reality that we face. How to accomplish that, that's an open question. I'm not saying necessarily that we all have to march out into the streets of every community and tell the people who are sit in the banks and elsewhere and in the universities, you're gone, you're fired, because we don't have the authority to do that. But we have to change opinion sufficiently that they no longer can tell us what to do. We have to be willing to say no to them. We have to at least get that far.
I'm wondering if we're taking one place so that people can focus around one idea, something like this pod, to say, okay, the Department of Education Secretary is saying, maybe we should allow money to go with the family. I mean, she's getting a lot of heat from this one. I'm kind of feeling sorry for her, even though I don't agree a whole lot of other places. But this one, it seems like maybe this is one place that we could rally. Is it, you think?
Absolutely. I mean, look, middle-income families are doing the pod thing, right? That's happening. Upper-income families have always had the resources to buy into the school district. But even for middle-income families, you have to be able to pay twice, right? Once for your property taxes to support the district system, and then twice for your private school tuition.
Well, in this one, at $500 a kid, in one of the schools in your example, they had the teacher has 4 children there. Each family had 2. That's $1,000. Now, for a middle, that's a lot of money, especially now with unemployment being so high. So Henry, do you think is this something maybe we could rally? Is there one idea that will then build out that public?
I think it's an idea, but what will change people's minds is negative experience.
They're getting plenty of that.
Yeah, well, right now it's hypothetical. If we're sitting in month 4 and they've had 4 months of dealing with closed schools, inadequate education, family tensions rising, and they look and say, well, the prospect is the new guys want more of the same. That's when people are willing to embrace change. And when they are willing to embrace change, advocates of change need to be ready with proposals that actually solve their problems. And the pod idea is one that would actually solve people's problems as opposed to pose new ones.
Well, let me ask you this, though, because you look at the polling. In fact, this is your specialty area. I know we're far from November at this point, but the political divide is that the status quo, if you want to call the current president, is saying, I want you to be able to get all of these options. The new guy who wants the job is saying, no, 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 we're not opening schools. And it seems like all of the left is on the side of we're not opening these schools unless you do these things. I mean, the list of what they said out of Los Angeles that they want, this is a non-starter. That's the non-starter, that you have to do all of this progressive social engineering for us to open schools. I'm wondering if the election is going to be turned on an issue like this because parents are now getting notices Like Nicole just got her notice. We're not going back to school. Your children are not going back to school till January.
Yeah, there's lots of things that for the election to turn out well for Trump, there has to be a dramatic change of opinion. Could this be one of the things that accompany and facilitate it? Yes, it would require Trump to be disciplined about talking about withdrawing and there your reaction tells the problem.
I don't know.
But here's
wait, let me have a bill.
You know, the Chinua Achebe wrote a book called Things Fall Apart, and it's a wonderful read. It has nothing to do with the United States. It's in Africa, Central Africa. But things can fall apart here. That's the point of my making that reference. And think about these parents whose schools are not opening and who can't go to work. They can't pay the $500 for a pod because they are not being paid. And they are going to know that the teachers who are not teaching are being paid.
They are being paid.
In other words, we're driving a wedge.
That's right.
Between the comfortable and the discomforted.
Interesting.
And if we take occasion to point that out to people, you're paying a price to keep these people at a comfortable salary and not getting anything for it, they might begin to change their mind.
Well, they might, but if you can get that message.
Yeah, and the irony here, too, is that it's the left keeping schools closed, right? Teachers' unions. And so the left, in a way, is sort of enabling this free market, parent-centered revolution in the delivery of education, which is amazing. So we've got to make sure we've got school choice options in place so that low-income families can participate, can take their dollars, pay teachers directly, participate in these pods. And even short of that, we're already hearing about pods pulling together their own resources to sponsor a low-income child to come join a pod. So there's even this great, robust civil society response.
But, all right, what about this? Dr. Allen, I don't want him to lose his thought, but I also want to ask you about the that self-quarantining. Like, are they sleeping with each other? They got to stay at each other's house like a extra slumber
Just a
party.
quick note on cost. Remember, the child care credit is easily expanded in this emergency to take care of some of these expenses. And it already can apply because that's a form of child care that we're talking about in these pods. It is not as remote as it sounds. And remember, the $72 billion in the Department of Education multiplied 5 times to get all the spending in the country on education.
It's just incredible. But you're mentioning, yes, because people know that they get that write-off and deduction for their per child credit.
Precisely.
So you're saying it can be just expanded out.
could
What is it, like
easily do that.
$1,500 right now or something
And
like
at the
that?
state level, a personal use tax credit to pay for that as well.
pay for that as
really
well.
And for low-income families, education savings accounts, there are a whole lot of policy tools that are available.
we can move toward it. Are you satisfied that maybe we can do this regardless of who wins the election?
I think that the Democrats, if they win, are going to find that they will reap the whirlwind in the next few years because if they win, they're going to win by people who want stability and a return to a pre-Trump era. And the Democrats are talking about moving in a direction that these voters don't want.
More chaos.
More change, more upheaval, and often the sort of change and upheaval will directly impact them in areas like if you're going to shut down utilities by 2035, anybody who consumes or produces energy is going to be hit. If you're talking about shutting down schools until there's no possibility of COVID spreading, you're talking about tens of millions of their voters who aren't into the ideological agenda.
I wish I could be that hopeful, but look at the folks in Venezuela, look at folks in Nigeria. Well, if we vote for the opposition to the ideas we want, maybe we can realize them by public pressure. I don't see that. Is that going to happen because we're Americans, Dr. Allen? Is there a possibility that they can elect the hard left and then still get ideas from the right?
It's going to happen because they haven't completely silenced us yet. But the question is, will they be able to silence us if we don't speak up, if we don't do something?
Do you think that this is an idea that is going to catch on? I mean, where did you find out about pandemic policies in your own research?
Facebook groups that are popping up with thousands of new members joining over the past few days. I do think it will catch on. We're at about 3% right now overall of the K-12 population that homeschools prior to the pandemic.
Wow.
So what will be interesting is to know how does that number shift moving forward. I think we can think about the pod situation or micro-schooling or cottage classes as an extension of the homeschooling idea. So knowing it's about 3% right now, about 1.8 million kids, give or take, will be fascinating to see a year from now.
Wait, 1.8 million pod in it?
No, homeschooling.
Oh, homeschooling it. Okay.
Right.
I've seen numbers up to 5 million.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but it's more like 1 million.
It's about 1.8.
Okay, 1.8 million.
Yeah.
Wow, Henry, I think that you were onto something when you said that we are going to see this opportunity revolution like charter schools and homeschools. We'll be right back.
It's time for a cure. CURE is a coalition of new voices with new ideas that will become new policies. We are the CURE. The Center for Urban Renewal and Education, headquartered in Washington, D.C., CURE works with churches, political, and business leaders on behalf of urban communities. CURE's mission is to address issues of culture, race, and poverty from a Judeo-Christian perspective. CURE. Join with us. Under the new administration, there has never been a better time to help Black communities.
If the act passes in its current form as H.R. 5, then every right that women have fought for will cease to exist. H.R. 5 is a human rights violation. Every person in this country will lose their right to single-sex sports, shelters, grants, and loans. The law will forbid ever distinguishing between women and men. Male rapists will go to women's prisons and will likely assault female inmates. Female survivors of rape will be unable to contest male presence in women's shelters. Men will dominate women's sports. Girls who would have taken first place will be denied scholastic opportunity. Women who use male pronouns to talk about men may be arrested, fined, and banned from social media platforms. Girls will stay home from school when they have their periods to avoid harassment by boys in mixed-sex toilets. Girls and women will no longer have a right to ask for female medical staff or intimate care providers. Everything I just listed is already happening. And it's only going to get worse if gender identity is recognized in federal law.
Why are conservatives standing with liberals to strip women of their rights? America's women deserve better.
Welcome back. I thought I'd bring you outside of the comforts of my studio to another debate. You heard from my friend Nicole and her story about her 3 children getting through this dilemma of schools not reopening. But now I want you to hear from another one of my friends, Jenny Beth Martin, who heads the Tea Party Patriots, but she's inside the White House right behind me, giving an impassionate story of her life as a mom.
I am with Tea Party Patriots. I'm also a mom, and my children are sitting right over there, so thank you for having us here today. Mr. President, you are right, and I hope you will trust your instincts. America is not meant to be shut down, and we have to reopen schools this fall. I've been in touch with almost 1,000 doctors from around the country. I helped Dr. Simone Gold spearhead a letter to you signed by 800 physicians and surgeons who talked about the side effects of the lockdowns. I've done a second letter with over 150 doctors, 240 nurses, 330 educators, 70 national groups, and thousands of parents and concerned Americans who want to see schools reopened. Reopening schools is going to stabilize our society. I think it's the number one most important thing we can do to stabilize our society from top to bottom. Whether it is in a local community, just reestablishing calendars, which churches, nonprofit groups, traffic patterns, people who don't have children care about the calendar for schools. Kindergartners and elementary school students simply cannot learn looking at a Zoom screen. If they could, we wouldn't need schools in the first place. We could just plop them in front of a television. The last place in the world a middle school student needs to be is online, unsupervised by adults. They bully each other when they're in front of teachers. You can't even imagine what's going on with social media right now. Young adults and high school students are losing hope and optimism for the future. And in February, they had so much. And now we turn on the television and we can see the destruction that lack of hope and optimism is causing. Employers have to rebuild their companies. They need employees at 110% to be able to do that. We did everything we could to flatten this curve, and we have to roll up our sleeves now and rebuild our companies. But we can't do that when employees are dividing their time between taking care of their children indefinitely for who knows how long, and trying to get their job done. I have one employee who has 5 children. His wife is a dental hygienist. I'm granting him as much grace as I possibly can, which is easy to do. He's a wonderful employee, but I can't even imagine what it would be like to have 5 children and all of a sudden have to homeschool them all. And it's not even homeschooling, it's helping them with digital learning. Homeschool parents have asked that we're careful about not conflating the two. For me, I'm a single mom now. In 2007, 8, and 9, I went through financial crisis. My then husband's business failed. We lost our house, we lost our cars, we lost everything. I cleaned houses to help make ends meet. I've done everything possible to rebuild. I know what those families who are now unemployed are facing. Trying to divide their time between taking care of their children, not knowing if their children are going to be educated, and figuring out what they're going to do with their life is the hardest. It's incredibly difficult. And for people who think, oh, we can just work at home, or you're an essential employee, it sends the wrong message. Every single person in this country is essential. We are the United States of America. Every one of us is essential. Every one of us is important. And not every single family can afford a computer so that their children can be online at the same time, or Wi-Fi, as Kellyanne was just talking about, to be able to do Zoom all at the same time. So families are suffering, and the education is suffering as well. And as a single mom, this situation is ripping me in two. You cannot be in 2 places at once, physically or mentally. And I'm doing the very best I can to take care of my children. Their father, when they're living with their father, he does a great job taking care of them. But when they're with me, I'm doing everything I can to take care of them, help them prepare for their senior year of high school, make up prom, dealing with whatever else we have to deal with from the shutdowns, and run a company and work. And it's impossible. It's impossible to do what we need to do. So the schools must be reopened. It will stabilize our country. I cannot thank you enough for doing this today and sending this message. And the doctors who I've been working with, they want to do anything they can to help calm the fear that is permeating our country. They understand we have to have a healthy respect for the virus, and we have to be able to live our lives. And they and I will do anything we can to help you with that.
That's inside the debate. That's inside the White House. You've heard quite a bit from Nicole, from my expert panel, from Jeannie Beth, and now you're going to hear next my closing thoughts.
If the act passes in its current form as H.R. 5, then every right that women have fought for will cease to exist. H.R. 5 is a human rights violation. Every person in this country will lose their right to single-sex sports, shelters, grants, and loans. The law will forbid ever distinguishing between women and men. Male rapists will go to women's prisons and will likely assault female inmates. Female survivors of rape will be unable to contest male presence in women's shelters. Men will dominate women's sports. Girls who would have taken first place will be denied scholastic opportunity. Women who use male pronouns to talk about men may be arrested, fined, and banned from social media platforms. Girls will stay home from school when they have their periods to avoid harassment by boys in mixed-sex toilets. Girls and women will no longer have a right to ask for female medical staff or intimate care providers. Everything I just listed is already happening. And it's only going to get worse if gender identity is recognized in federal law.
Why are conservatives standing with liberals to strip women of their rights? America's women deserve better.
Well, I must tell you that I'm not a bit surprised at the behaviors of these unions, because they are nothing short of political machines. From what I've learned after 30 years of advocating that education money should follow children to the schools their parents want, I know for a fact that the teachers' unions are very disconnected from the needs of families and students. Our nation's top 2 teachers' unions are entrenched in a worldview in direct opposition to the fundamentals of truth, that today's students need in order to discern right from wrong and to concentrate on learning relevant life skills for adulthood. Just one glance at the websites of the NEA and the American Federation of Teachers will expose you that they have an agenda far beyond satisfying wholesome desires of parents nor teachers. I think you are with me that responsible, free people can courageously balance risk and competing objectives to come up with creative solutions. I think this is why Secretary Betsy DeVos is adamant that our nation's parents and teachers can figure out how to safely return children to the classroom. And given the realities and discussions you just heard, you can probably appreciate why our nation's current education secretary is looking at all options for concerned parents to get in-person learning experiences for their children, including options to let the money currently allotted to schools go directly to families, if that is what it will take to help our nation's children get back into physical learning environments so that they can get a well-rounded and quality education. And I agree. So let's make sure that we keep our nation's schools open and free. I'm Star Parker. Thanks for joining me again this week on Cure America, and I will see you next time.